A battle-scarred Belgian Malinois burst through hospital doors at 2 a.m. and walked past every doctor, every security guard, every frantic nurse, to press his head against the one woman nobody in that building had ever bothered to notice. 5 years. Same shifts, same hallways, same people looking straight through Emma Carter like she was made of glass. The dog saw something different, and 3 hours later, when Emma quietly pointed at an X-ray that should have been impossible, a fracture that official military records swore didn't exist, every comfortable lie inside Silver Ridge Medical Center started coming apart at the seams. If you've never subscribed to this channel, right now is the time, because stories like this one don't come around twice. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me. Every single part matters. The automatic doors hadn't finished opening when the screaming started. It came from the triage desk first, a short, involuntary sound from the intake coordinator who dropped her clipboard and shoved backward in her rolling chair hard enough to slam into the filing cabinet behind her. Then it spread, the way panic always does in confined spaces, person to person, a ripple of sharp gasps and sudden backward steps that cleared a path straight through the center of the emergency room. Silver Ridge Medical Center sat at the edge of Aspen Valley, Colorado, wedged between a mountain road and 3 miles of pine forest that turned black and impenetrable after sundown. On a Tuesday night in late October, the ER ran at about 60% capacity, enough patients to keep the staff busy, not enough to justify the chaos that erupted at 2:17 a.m. when a Belgian Malinois shouldered through the automatic entry doors like he owned every square foot of the building. He was big. Not the biggest Malinois Emma Carter had ever seen, but the kind of big that comes from muscle layered over bone, over sheer refusal to stop moving. A 2-inch scar bisected his left ear, where it had been partially torn and badly rehealed. His coat carried the faded tracking marks of a working harness worn for years, pressure lines rubbed thin across both shoulders, pigment differences where gear straps had sat through hundreds of field operations. His paws were wide and calloused, his nails worn down not by grooming but by ground, concrete, gravel, hard-packed dirt. He moved with his nose slightly elevated, reading the room in layers the way trained dogs always do. Air currents first, then sound, then people. He dismissed the terrified intake coordinator, dismissed the 2 nurses frozen near the supply alcove, dismissed the security officer whose hand had gone to his radio and stopped there, paralyzed by the particular uncertainty of a situation no protocol had ever prepared him for. The dog's head turned. He found Emma Carter standing at the medication cart 12 feet from the main corridor, holding a patient chart she had been updating when the noise started. She had not screamed. She had not stepped back. She stood with the chart open in both hands and watched the animal work the room the same way she always watched things, quietly, completely, like she was cataloging details for a report nobody had asked her to write. The Malinois crossed the distance between them in 8 unhurried steps. He pressed his head against her left thigh with a weight that was neither aggressive nor anxious, just decided. Emma looked down at him. He looked up at her. Neither of them moved. "Someone want to explain." Her supervisor's voice came from behind the nursing station, sharp and rising. Donna Marsh appeared from around the corner, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, expression already set to the particular brand of irritated authority she deployed as her default mode. She stopped when she saw the dog. "What in the— Emma, get away from that animal." "He's not threatening anyone," Emma said. She hadn't looked up from the dog. "He's 110 pounds of military. He's calm." Emma finally glanced toward Donna, brief and even. "His pulse is visible at the neck. Elevated, but not aggression elevated. He's stressed from the environment. Fluorescent lights, chemical smell, the PA system." She returned her attention to the dog. "He came in here because he wanted to. They don't just—" "Donna." Emma's voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It simply cut. "He's not going to hurt anyone." The ER had gone almost completely silent. 8 staff members, 11 patients who could see from their beds or chairs, 1 security officer still holding his radio without transmitting. All of them watching a nurse have a quiet conversation with a combat-trained dog that had walked in off a mountain road in the middle of the night. The automatic doors opened again 2 minutes later. The man who came through them was bleeding. He had his right arm wrapped in what had been a flannel shirt at some point before he'd torn it into strips, and applied a field tourniquet above a wound that had soaked through 3 layers of improvised bandaging. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of lean muscle distribution that comes from functional use rather than gym work, the kind of tan that doesn't wash off in October. A scar ran along his jaw, old and silver. He moved with the specific controlled gait of someone managing significant pain through discipline rather than medication. He stopped inside the doorway and found his dog immediately. Something shifted in his face. Relief, maybe. The particular kind that comes when you've been genuinely scared and then suddenly aren't. Ghost. His voice was low, rougher than it probably normally was. There you are. The Malinois, Ghost, glanced back at him, then returned his attention to Emma. His head was still pressed against her leg. The man looked at Emma. Emma looked at him. "He's yours?" she said. "He's—" the man started, then seemed to reconsider the sentence. "We served together. I'd call him mine, but he's always had opinions about that." He took 2 more steps into the room and his jaw tightened. "I need someone to look at my arm." "I can see that." Emma had already set the chart down on the medication cart. She was looking at his tourniquet, the placement, the tension, the way his fingers were responding compared to the ones above the binding. "How long ago?" "The tourniquet?" He glanced down. "Maybe 40 minutes. "How long since the injury?" 55 minutes, give or take." "What happened?" "I was pulling him out of a building." His eyes moved to Ghost, then back. There was debris. A beam came down. My arm went into it before I could— He stopped, looked at her more carefully. "You're a nurse?" "Yes." "Not a vet?" "No." She gestured toward the trauma bay. "Doesn't change what I can see. Tourniquets positioned correctly. You did that yourself?" "Standard kit, yeah." "Army?" He paused 1 beat too long, the way people do when they're deciding how much to confirm. "Rangers, 2nd Battalion, 12 years." She nodded once, absorbing that without comment, and turned toward the trauma bay entrance. "Dr. Navarro is on tonight. He's good. I'm going to get him now." She glanced back at Ghost, who had followed her 1 step before stopping. "He can stay here until someone tells him otherwise." "He doesn't usually do that," the man said. Emma had already started moving. She turned her head without fully stopping. "Do what?" "Go to strangers." A pause. "Any strangers?" She didn't respond to that. She'd learned, a long time ago, not to make too much of things she couldn't explain. His name was Lucas Hayes. Emma learned that from the intake form while Dr. Navarro and a surgical resident cleaned and assessed the wound, a deep laceration running from just below the elbow toward the wrist, complicated by a secondary puncture from what the debris analysis would later confirm was a rusted structural bolt. The building where it happened was an abandoned industrial facility 12 miles outside town. Lucas had gone in after Ghost, when the dog had slipped his lead during their evening trail run and disappeared into the structure through a gap in the chain link perimeter. "Classic," the resident muttered, reaching for irrigation supplies. Lucas's eyes, from the bed, found the resident with a flatness that made the younger man choose silence for the rest of the procedure. Emma worked the room alongside Navarro without being asked, tracking the irrigation timeline, noting the wound depth in her own notations separate from the official chart, watching Lucas's pain response against his attempts to suppress it. He was good at suppression, the kind of good that meant years of practice. Ghost had been allowed into a side corridor rather than the waiting area, primarily because every attempt to move him to the waiting area had resulted in his absolute, utterly calm, completely immovable refusal to go. He simply lay down in the corridor and didn't move, and nobody seemed willing to test what happened if you tried harder than that. Emma passed him twice during the first hour. Both times his eyes tracked her across the hall. Both times she felt it, the particular awareness of being precisely watched by something that doesn't have any reason to perform observation. Dogs either watch you or they don't. Ghost watched her with the careful, continuous attention of an animal that had made a decision. She noted it the same way she noted everything. At 3:40 a.m., when Lucas was stitched and medicated and lying with his eyes at half-mast, Emma came to check his arm and found him more alert than she'd expected. Fighters always metabolize painkillers faster. Another thing she knew from a previous life she didn't discuss. You're the one who said he wasn't aggressive, Lucas said. His voice was clearer than it had any right to be. He wasn't. People usually see a Malinois come through a door and make certain assumptions. People usually don't look past the first impression. She was checking the wrap, not looking at his face. Especially with military breeds. You know working dogs? I've had some experience. He watched her. What kind of experience? The kind that tells me his gait coming in here wasn't right. She finished the check and stepped back. How old is he? Something shifted in Lucas's expression. Not much. Just enough. 9. When did he retire from active service? 14 months ago. A pause. Why? Emma looked toward the corridor where Ghost was lying, invisible from here but somehow still present in the room's awareness. The way he moved when he came through the doors. He was managing something, not dramatically. He's too trained for that. But I noticed it. Lucas was quiet for a moment. He went through a lot, he said carefully. In service, it didn't look like normal aging. She met his eyes. It looked like compensation. He's distributing weight differently on his rear left. He's controlling his hip extension when he turns. That's not a dog who's slowing down with age. That's a dog who's learned how to move around something that hurts. Lucas stared at her. I could be wrong, Emma said, the way she always said it. Not as a hedge, but as a genuine acknowledgement that she was working from observation alone. But I'd want to look at his records. His records, Lucas said slowly, say he's healthy. When was his last evaluation? 14 months ago, when he retired. He paused. The same evaluation that cleared him for adoption into my custody. Emma nodded, didn't push. She wrote something in her notation, brief, precise, and capped her pen. Who did the evaluation? She asked. Casual. The way she asked everything. Lucas said the name without hesitation. Meridian Veterinary Contracting. They handle most of the DoD's retirement processing for military working dogs. Have for the last 7 years. Emma's pen was already capped. She didn't uncap it. She didn't move for approximately 2 seconds, which doesn't sound like much until you've spent enough time watching people and learned that 2 seconds of total stillness in a moving person is always a response to something significant. Okay, she said. Get some rest. We'll check the wrap in 2 hours. She left the room. In the corridor, Ghost lifted his head as she passed. She paused, just briefly, and laid her hand on the flat of his skull. Not patting, not performing comfort, just contact, one being acknowledging another. Then she walked to the far end of the hallway, past the supply room, past the break room, to the narrow maintenance corridor where the fluorescent tube had been burned out for 6 weeks, and nobody had replaced it. She stood in the near dark and breathed. Meridian Veterinary Contracting. She hadn't heard that name in 4 years. The last time she had, she'd been sitting across a desk from a man in a Defense Department office who had told her, with the particular smooth authority of someone who has never had to raise his voice, that her concerns were noted, her findings were under review, and that she should understand the potential professional consequences of pursuing this matter through unofficial channels. She had been 29. 8 months out of a government veterinary services contract she'd taken directly from her Army Reserve Commission. She had written a report, 43 pages, sourced, documented, cross-referenced, detailing what she'd found in 14 different case files for retired military working dogs processed through Meridian. Chronic injuries marked as resolved. Hip dysplasia noted and then unnoted in subsequent paperwork. One dog with a documented spinal compression injury in his active duty file who appeared in his Meridian retirement evaluation as fully healthy, unrestricted, no outstanding medical concerns. That dog had died 11 months later. The man behind the desk had told her the report was under review. She'd followed up 4 times over the following 6 weeks. Then she'd been informed her contract had not been renewed. Then the report, according to the department's records management system, had been archived into a folder structure that did not appear in any of the standard retrieval indexes. She had filed a follow-up with 2 other agencies. One had never responded. The other had sent a form letter. She had moved to Colorado. Sat for her nursing boards. Taken a job at Silver Ridge Medical Center in Aspen Valley because it was 3 states away from everywhere she'd been, and nobody here knew what she'd spent 2 years trying to do. And now a 9-year-old Belgian Malinois had walked through the emergency room doors and pressed his head against her leg. and his retirement evaluation had been done by Meridian Veterinary Contracting, and the way he moved when nobody was watching him told her everything she needed to know. She stood in the dark maintenance corridor for 4 more minutes. Then she went back to work. The shift ran until 7 a.m. In the hours between Lucas Hayes' admission and the shift change, Emma did what she always did. She worked, she charted, she checked on patients with the particular quality of attention that her colleagues read as excessive and that she understood as simply complete. She monitored Ghost through the corridor window when she passed, noting twice that he repositioned himself, each time choosing his lying posture in a way that minimized pressure on his left hip. She wrote this down in her own notebook, not the official system. At 5:15 a.m., Donna Marsh materialized at the nursing station with her arms crossed and her reading glasses now on her face rather than her forehead, which meant she had moved from managerial irritation into administrative concern. "The dog is still here," Donna said. "His handler is still here," Emma replied without looking up from her charting. "The dog is not a patient." "No, but asking him to leave hasn't worked, and physically removing a 98-pound former military working dog from a building at 5 in the morning isn't something I'd put in anyone's job description." Donna's jaw moved. "You've been spending an unreasonable amount of time. I've been completing my rounds and performing my duties within every standard protocol." Emma put the pen down and looked at Donna directly. "If you have a specific concern about my documentation or my patient care, I'd like to hear it." Donna didn't have one. She never did. That was the particular frustration of Emma's supervisory situation. Donna's dissatisfaction was diffuse and atmospheric. It had no single edge you could put pressure on. It existed as a general sense that Emma was somehow wrong, somehow not quite right for this environment, too quiet or too watchful or too something that Donna couldn't name, because naming it would require her to examine it more carefully than she was willing to. "Just," Donna started, stopped. "Keep your patient documentation current." "It is current. And don't spend nursing shift resources on the dog." "I haven't billed a single minute to that animal." Emma held the eye contact for 1 more second, then returned to the chart. "Is there anything else?" Donna left. Emma finished the notation. At 6:40 a.m., 20 minutes before shift change, she went back to Lucas Hayes' room. He was awake. She'd suspected he would be. Fighters rarely slept in clinical settings. The environmental noise patterns were wrong, the vulnerability position too uncomfortable. He was sitting up, his arm resting across his lap, his eyes on the window where the Colorado mountains were beginning to separate themselves from the pre-dawn dark. "His name is Ghost," Lucas said, without turning, knowing she was there before she'd made noise enough to warrant it. "Military habit." "I named him." "Most handlers don't name their working dogs," Emma said. "Most handlers get a new assignment after 2 years." Lucas turned then, slowly. "We were together for 7. He pulled me out of a building in Kandahar. I pulled him out of a building last night." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement of something absurd. "I guess we're even." Emma stood at the foot of the bed. "How long have you been watching him compensate?" Lucas looked at her for a long moment. 8 months, he said, finally, quietly. "Maybe longer. I told myself it was just age." "Yeah." A pause. "He's 9. Malinois slow down." "Some do." Emma kept her voice steady. "Some slow down because they're compensating for something that was never properly treated." Lucas was quiet. "The contractor that did his retirement evaluation," Emma said. "Meridian." "Yeah." "Have you looked at the full documentation? The original evaluation file?" "I have copies." Something sharpened in his expression. "Why?" "I'd like to see them." She met his eyes. "With your permission." "I'm asking as someone who has a specific reason to want to understand what Meridian puts in those documents." The silence stretched between them. "You know something about them," Lucas said. It wasn't a question. "I know something about their previous work," Emma said. "I can't give you details right now, but if Ghost records look like what I think they might look like..." She stopped. "I need to see the documents first." Lucas studied her face the way he'd probably studied terrain before entering it, looking for routes, hazards, the specific geometry of what was visible versus what wasn't. "I'll get you the files," he said. "Thank you." She turned to leave. "Carter." His voice behind her. She stopped. Why did he go to you? When he came in. She didn't turn back around. I don't know. He's never done that, not with anyone. Animals make assessments, Emma said. Sometimes faster than people do. She paused one beat. Maybe he needed someone who would actually look at him. She left. Ghost was in the corridor, standing now. When she passed him, he turned and walked 6 steps in her direction before stopping, as if he'd intended to follow her and then caught himself, held at some invisible boundary of his own making. Emma didn't stop walking, but she felt it. The specific, inexplicable weight of being chosen by something that has no reason to choose you, and every reason to know better. Sad. The files came 3 days later. Lucas brought them to the hospital on a Thursday afternoon. A manila envelope, thick with paper, the kind of physical documentation that people almost never carry anymore, which told Emma something about the type of person Lucas Hayes was. He printed things. He kept originals. He maintained parallel records. She opened the envelope in the break room at the start of her shift, with 15 minutes before the floor would get moving. The Meridian evaluation for Ghost, officially designated MWD K147 in the military's working dog registry, was 42 pages. Most of it was standard format. Boilerplate language about service history, temperament assessment, behavioral markers, the standard physical metrics that populated every retirement evaluation for every military working dog who cycled out of active duty. Emma read it the way she read everything, completely, in order, without skipping. She found the first discrepancy on page 11. It was small, the kind of small that gets past people who are reading quickly, or reading for specific data points rather than overall coherence. A reference to Ghost's hip metrics in a movement assessment that didn't align with the baseline numbers recorded on page 4. Not dramatically different, just slightly off. A 2-degree discrepancy in documented range of motion that was recorded as within normal parameters, but that Emma, looking at it against the physical evidence of how Ghost had been moving for the past 3 days, understood as a compressed baseline. Someone had set the normal parameters floor slightly lower than the actual clinical standard. She found the second discrepancy on page 19. A dental notation that referenced a minor injury to Ghost's lower left canine, a chip that had been treated in the field during active service, but categorized the resolution as complete when the corresponding X-ray referenced in the footnote showed what was clearly a hairline propagation that hadn't been fully addressed. On page 27, she found what she was looking for, a section on spinal and hip integrity that had been completed using a standardized assessment form. Not a problem in itself, those forms existed for efficiency, but that had been populated with values that matched almost exactly the standard values printed as reference ranges in the blank form's header, not Ghost-specific numbers. The reference numbers. The kind of mistake that happens when you're filling in a document and you accidentally copy the template values instead of the actual measurements. Or the kind of thing that happens when you're not measuring at all, and you need the evaluation to show a healthy animal, and you're working too fast to catch that you've left the placeholder values in. Emma sat with the file for 11 minutes. Then she took out her personal notebook and began to write. She wrote for a long time. The break room stayed empty around her. The mountain light through the single window moved from the pale gray of early morning toward the sharper angle of actual day. Somewhere in the building, the first shift change conversations were beginning. The handoff checklists, the low voices of people transferring responsibility for other people's lives. Emma wrote until she had filled 4 pages. Then she capped her pen, closed the notebook, replaced it in her pocket, and put the Meridian evaluation back in the manila envelope. She thought about a file she had submitted 4 years ago that had disappeared into an archive index no one could retrieve. She thought about the man behind the desk who had told her, smoothly, that her concerns were noted. She thought about a dog with a spinal compression injury who had been declared fully healthy and had died 11 months later. And she thought about Ghost, right now, wherever Lucas had left him, standing in whatever posture he'd chosen to manage the pain in his hip that Meridian's evaluation had declared did not exist. Emma stood up. She picked up the envelope, and then her phone buzzed on the table. The internal hospital line, not her personal cell, and she picked it up without thinking. "Carter?" she said. The voice on the other end was not Donna. It was not anyone she recognized. It was male even, unhurried, and it said 4 words that turned the morning completely cold. "Stop looking at this." The line went dead. Emma stood in the empty break room with the phone in her hand and the manila envelope under her arm, and for exactly 3 seconds she was completely, carefully still. Then she put the phone down, tucked the envelope more securely, and walked out to start her shift. She did not report the call. That was the first decision, made before she reached the nursing station, before the shift briefing started, before the ordinary machinery of the hospital morning swallowed the previous hour whole. Emma walked out of the break room with the manila envelope under her arm and the phone call still sitting in the back of her throat like something she hadn't swallowed properly. And she made the calculation the way she made all calculations, fast, quiet, without broadcasting that she was making one. Reporting it meant paperwork. Paperwork meant Donna. Donna meant a conversation in which Emma would be required to explain why she was in possession of a patient's personal documents, why she had been examining the retirement evaluation of a military working dog, and what exactly she meant by discrepancies in a file produced by a federally contracted veterinary services company. That conversation would be 1 minute of concern and 19 minutes of liability management, and at the end of it, the envelope would be in hospital administration's hands, and Emma would be back on the floor with nothing except a notation in her personnel file about inappropriate use of break time. She'd been down that road before. Different building, different names, same destination. So she said nothing. She tucked the envelope into her locker, worked her shift, and spent the next 7 hours doing her job with the particular focused completeness that her colleagues alternately admired and found unsettling, depending on whether they'd ever needed someone to catch what they'd missed. Lucas Hayes was discharged that afternoon. She saw him in the corridor near the elevator bank at 4:20 p.m., dressed, arm wrapped in a proper bandage now, Ghost beside him on a lead that the dog wore with the tolerant compliance of an animal who understood leashes were for other people's comfort rather than his own. Lucas looked better than he had any right to look 12 hours post-suturing, the particular resilience of men who'd spent years refusing to stay down. He stopped when he saw her. "They're releasing me," he said. "I know. I signed off on the rap check this morning." "Right." He looked at her with the same terrain assessment quality she'd noticed the night before. "Did you get a chance to look at the file?" Emma glanced at Ghost, who was watching her with that steady, unperformed attention. She looked back at Lucas. "Yes." "And?" "I found some things I want to look at more carefully." She kept her voice at corridor level. Low, not secretive, just appropriate. "I have questions about the assessment methodology, specifically the range of motion documentation on pages 11 and 27. Lucas absorbed this without expression, which was its own kind of expression. "How bad?" "I don't know yet." She met his eyes directly. "But I'd like Ghost to have a proper imaging workup, hip and lumbar, not through the hospital, through an independent veterinary radiologist." "You think Meridian falsified his evaluation?" She didn't answer that directly. "Not in a hospital corridor. I think there are inconsistencies I can't explain any other way, and I think Ghost deserves an accurate picture of what's actually going on in his body." Lucas was quiet for a moment. Beside him, Ghost sat down, not commanded, just choosing, and leaned his shoulder against Lucas's leg. "I know a vet in Glenwood Springs," Lucas said. "Dr. Arriaga. She's done work with former handlers before. She's not connected to any DoD contracting network." "That would be good. I'll call her today." He paused. "Carter, the phone call you mentioned. You said someone called the hospital line." She hadn't mentioned the phone call. She was certain she hadn't mentioned it. She looked at him steadily. "I didn't say anything about a phone call," she said. Something moved across Lucas's face. Not surprise exactly. More like the confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "No," he said. "You didn't." He reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. "This was on my truck when I went to the parking structure this morning, under the wiper." Emma took it, unfolded it. 4 words, printed from a standard font, centered on plain white paper. "Leave the dog alone." She refolded it carefully and handed it back. Her hands were steady. "Keep that," she said. "Don't throw it away." "I wasn't planning to." He pocketed it. "Someone's paying attention." "Yes." "To you or to me?" "I don't know yet." She looked at Ghost one more time. "Get the imaging done. Document everything Dr. Arriaga finds, in writing, with her signature on every page. Keep copies in at least 2 separate physical locations. she paused, and pay cash. Lucas looked at her for a long moment. You've done this before, he said. Emma didn't answer. Not nursing, he said. Something else. Get Ghost his imaging, she said. Call me when you have the results. She gave him her personal cell number, written on the back of a hospital notepad sheet, not texted, not emailed, and walked back toward the nursing station. Behind her, she heard Ghost make a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not a whine exactly, something lower, quieter. The sound of an animal watching someone walk away and having opinions about it. She didn't look back. The call from Donna came the following morning, before Emma's shift started. Not a text, not an email. A call, which meant it was the kind of conversation Donna wanted to have with no written record. Emma was in her car in the hospital parking structure, engine running for heat against the October cold, when the phone rang. I need you to come in early, Donna said. Dr. Okafor wants a meeting. Chief of Emergency Medicine. That was 2 levels above Donna. Emma noted this without letting it change her breathing. What time? She said. 7:30, his office. I'll be there. She sat for another 2 minutes after the call ended. The parking structure was mostly empty this early. A handful of vehicles from the night shift staff, the maintenance trucks that arrived at 6. The particular silence of a concrete structure in a mountain town before the day had decided to start. Through the gap in the parking level, she could see a thin strip of the Elk Range, gray-white, with early snow above the tree line. She picked up her personal notebook from the passenger seat, flipped to the most recent pages, read through what she'd written, not because she'd forgotten it, but because she needed to think in the specific mode that writing put her in. 4 discrepancies in Ghost Meridian evaluation. 2 that could be attributed to clerical error. 2 that could not, at least not by anyone who understood what the numbers actually represented. She had cross-referenced the range of motion metrics against 3 published clinical standards for working dogs of Ghost's breed and age profile. The Meridian values sat at the outer boundary of acceptable in all 3 frameworks, technically defensible, but only if you accepted that Ghost was among the 5% least physically capable animals in his demographic. A 9-year-old Malinois with his activity level and muscle condition had no business being in that 5th percentile. The numbers had been chosen to be defensible, not accurate. There was a difference. She closed the notebook. Dr. Okafor's office occupied a corner of the administrative level that Emma had been inside exactly twice in 5 years, both times for annual performance reviews that had been conducted with the particular efficient warmth of someone checking boxes. He was a good administrator. Not always a good listener, but good at his job, which in hospital administration meant managing liability almost as much as it meant managing medicine. He was already seated when Emma arrived. Donna was there too, positioned slightly behind and to the left of Okafor's desk chair, the geography of institutional backup. And there was a third person, a man Emma didn't recognize, sitting in the chair to the right of the desk, mid-50s, gray at the temples, the kind of jacket that isn't quite a suit jacket but is trying very hard to be, and the specific quality of stillness that people develop when they spend a lot of time in rooms where they're evaluating other people. Emma sat in the chair across from Okafor and waited. Thank you for coming in early, Okafor said. He had his hands flat on the desk, which was a posture Emma associated with people who were preparing to deliver information they found uncomfortable. This is Richard Vance. He's from our hospital's legal counsel team. Not an introduction of the third man's actual role, Emma noted, a title that explained his presence without explaining his purpose. Good morning, Emma said to all 3 of them. Vance nodded minimally. Emma, Okafor said, and the use of her first name was precisely calculated. Not warmth, but the positioning of a conversation as informal enough to be deniable. We've had some concerns raised about, and I want to frame this correctly, about some documentation irregularities on the overnight shift from Tuesday into Wednesday. Emma waited. Specifically, Donna said, from her position behind Okafor's shoulder, there are notations in the nursing documentation for the Hayes admission that go beyond the scope of your clinical responsibilities. I documented what I observed, Emma said. You documented observations about an animal that is not a patient at this facility. Donna's voice had its administrative edge now, the one that appeared when she felt she was on solid institutional ground. You spent... She glanced at a sheet in front of her. Approximately 47 minutes across the overnight shift, making entries in the patient record that reference the physical condition of Mr. Hayes's dog. That's outside the scope of your nursing duties, and it creates a documentation issue for I documented observations relevant to the patient's reported history and his emotional and psychological state during treatment, Emma said. Her voice was even. Mr. Hayes's stress responses during the admission were partly connected to his concern for his dog. That's clinically relevant. I noted it. You noted range of motion observations about a Belgian Malinois. In the context of the patient's reported statements about the animal's behavior during the incident that caused his injury, yes. Okafor's hands shifted slightly on the desk. Emma, we're not here to formally discipline anyone. We just want to make sure. Is there a specific documentation policy I violated? Emma asked. She looked at Okafor directly. If there is, I'd like to see it in writing. If there isn't, I'd like to understand the basis for this meeting. Vance, who had been silent until now, spoke for the first time. His voice was the kind of neutral that takes effort to achieve. Ms. Carter, are you currently in possession of any documents belonging to Mr. Hayes that were not submitted through standard hospital channels? The room changed with that question. Not visibly. No one moved, nothing shifted on the surface. But Emma felt the edges of the conversation clarify into something sharper and more deliberate than an administrative check-in. She looked at Vance. No, she said, which was technically true. The documents were in her locker, which was not a hospital channel, but they also hadn't been submitted through one, and they belonged to Lucas, who had given them to her voluntarily. Are you engaged in any personal investigation of matters related to Mr. Hayes's admission? Vance asked. I'm a nurse, Emma said. I don't conduct investigations. Vance held her eyes for a moment. Then he wrote something on the legal pad in front of him and said nothing further. Okafor cleared his throat. We just want to make sure our documentation practices are clean going forward. Dr. Navarro spoke highly of your work on the admission itself. The clinical care was appropriate. He paused. We'd like to keep it that way. Emma stood up. Is that everything? Donna started to say something. Okafor raised one hand slightly and she stopped. That's everything, he said. Emma walked out. In the elevator going down to the clinical level, she stood alone and let the building move around her, the particular mechanical drop and settle of the elevator, the sound of the hospital finding its morning rhythm below. Her reflection in the metal doors was distorted enough to be unrecognizable, which she found, for some reason, almost funny. Are you currently in possession of any documents belonging to Mr. Hayes? Someone had told Vance about the documents. Vance was not hospital legal counsel, or if he was also something else, because hospital legal counsel didn't ask questions with that particular practice neutrality. Hospital legal counsel asked questions that protected the institution. Vance had asked questions that probed her, which meant someone outside the hospital had already made contact with someone inside it. 14 hours since the note on Lucas's truck. Moving fast. Lucas called at noon. Emma took it in the stairwell between the second and third floors, which had the worst camera coverage in the building. She'd learned this in year 2, during a period when she was figuring out the geometry of the space she worked in, the same way she always mapped any environment she spent significant time in. Arriaga did the imaging this morning, Lucas said. He sounded different from before, flatter. The particular flatness of someone who has had a suspicion confirmed and is still in the process of absorbing it. Hip series and lumbar. Emma leaned against the stairwell wall. What did she find? Left hip. There's an old fracture, healed badly. She says it looks like it was managed in the field without proper intervention, and then just left. The bone remodeled around it. A pause. She called it a significant structural compromise. Said with his activity level, the joint has been under irregular load for probably 2 years. Emma closed her eyes briefly. Not from surprise. From the specific weariness of being right about something you'd wanted to be wrong about. Arriaga pulled up the Meridian evaluation while I was there, Lucas continued. The hip assessment in that document shows the joint is unremarkable. No prior injury, full range of motion, bilateral symmetry, no compensatory gait indicators. His voice had gone very quiet. Carter. Ghost has been walking around on a badly healed fracture for over a year. The evaluation said he was completely healthy. I know, Emma said. You knew. I suspected. She paused. I'm sorry, Lucas. The silence on his end was the kind that has weight. Who are these people? He said finally. Meridian. What are they actually doing? Clearing dogs? Emma said. Signing off that animals with injuries are healthy, either because it's cheaper to process them out as healthy, no follow-on medical liability, no mandatory treatment before adoption, or because someone in the contracting chain is getting paid to reduce the numbers that would trigger additional DoD veterinary review. She stopped. Probably both. How long has this been going on? She didn't answer immediately. Carter. His voice sharpened. How long? I have documentation from 4 years ago, she said. 14 case files. One animal with a confirmed active duty spinal injury who was cleared as healthy and died less than a year later. She paused. When I tried to report it, the report disappeared. I lost my contract. I moved to Colorado. The stairwell was very quiet. Somewhere above her, a door opened and closed, footsteps moving away. You've been sitting on this for 4 years, Lucas said. I wasn't sitting on it. I was... She stopped. I tried. The channels I went through closed. I didn't have enough to go around them. A beat. Now maybe I do. Ghost is enough, Lucas said. His voice had changed again. Something harder in it. 14 case files and a current animal with documented falsification, that's enough. It might be, Emma said carefully, but we need to be thoughtful about how we move. Someone's already paying attention. Vance... She stopped herself. Who's Vance? She hadn't meant to say the name, but it was out, and pulling it back would be worse. A man who sat in on a meeting at this hospital this morning asking about the documents you gave me. He is not what they told me he was. She paused. We need to be careful. Define careful. Arriaga's report. Get 2 copies. Physical. Not emailed, not cloud stored, not in any system that has a password that someone else could legally compel the disclosure of. Physical copies. 2 different locations. Done. And I need you to tell me something. She hesitated. The other handlers. From your unit. The ones whose dogs went through Meridian evaluation at retirement. Do you still have contact with them? Lucas was quiet for a moment. She could hear him thinking. Not literally, but the specific quality of a phone silence that comes from someone organizing something before they speak. 6, he said finally. Maybe 7 who'd talk. Don't contact them yet. Not until I know more about who Vance is and who he's reporting to. She paused. But have the list ready. Okay? A beat. Carter. Yeah. The phone call you got at the hospital. Someone called the internal line. Yes. That means someone knew you were looking at those files the same night you were looking at them. A pause. Either the hospital has a leak or someone was watching you specifically. Emma had been sitting with that fact since Thursday morning. I know, she said. That's not a random warning. That's surveillance. I know that too. Another silence. Then, you're not scared. It wasn't quite a question. Emma thought about how to answer it honestly. I'm cautious, she said. There's a difference. She could hear something shift on his end. A door, movement, Ghost's nails on a hard floor as the dog repositioned. Arriaga wants to see him for a follow-up next week, Lucas said. She's talking about possible surgical consultation, hip resurfacing, depending on how the specialist reads the scans. That's the right call, Emma said. She also... He stopped, started again. She said that with appropriate treatment, he's probably got 4 or 5 more good years. That's not nothing for a 9-year-old working dog. A pause. Without treatment, she said the joint would have failed within 18 months. The pain was going to get a lot worse before anyone would have been able to ignore it. Emma didn't say anything. If you hadn't noticed how he was moving, Lucas said, in the ER, at 2 in the morning when nobody was asking you to look at him. He walked into the building, Emma said. He made it pretty easy to notice. That's not what I mean. She knew what he meant. She let the moment exist without filling it, which was usually the right call. Tell Arriaga I'd like a copy of her written report when it's finalized, Emma said. Not emailed. Mail it, physical copy. You really think this is that bad, Lucas said. It was not a question this time either. I think it's bad enough that someone called a hospital internal line at 5:30 in the morning to tell me to stop looking, Emma said. And I think it's bad enough that they also left a note on your truck, which means they were physically present near this hospital. She paused. Which means this isn't a lawyer making calls. This is someone with assets. The stairwell hummed around her, ventilation system, the distant sound of an elevator passing, the ordinary noise of a building full of people going about the ordinary business of keeping other people alive. I'm going to make some calls tonight, Lucas said. Not to handlers, to someone I trust from the battalion. He works in logistics now, but he spent 3 years in DoD contracting oversight before that. A beat. He might know the Meridian name. Be careful what you say on the phone, Emma said. Ranger Carter, Lucas said. We were careful on the phone before you were born. She almost smiled. Arriaga's report, she said. 2 physical copies. 2 physical copies, he confirmed. I'll have one to you by Monday. She ended the call. She stood in the stairwell for another minute, thinking about a 42-page document that someone had spent time and money producing, not to help animals, but to make them disappear from view. 14 case files. Probably more. An unknown number of dogs who had served, been injured, and been signed off as healthy so that nobody would have to pay for their care or account for what had happened to them. And somewhere in that structure, someone who had enough reach to place a watcher near a hospital in Aspen Valley within hours of Emma Carter opening a manila envelope in a break room at 6 in the morning. She climbed back up to the 3rd floor. Donna was at the nursing station. She looked up when Emma appeared, and for a moment her expression was something Emma couldn't quite read. Not the usual irritation, not the administrative concern from the morning meeting. Something more careful, more deliberate. We're getting a new admit, Donna said. Trauma from Route 82. I need you on it. Of course, Emma said. She moved to the trauma bay. She did her job. She tracked vitals, managed the admit, communicated with the surgical team upstairs with the clean, precise brevity that had always been her natural register in clinical settings. No excess words, no performed bedside manner, just accurate information delivered to the right people at the right time. At 3 in the afternoon, she passed the nursing station and found a folded piece of paper sitting on her keyboard. Not an envelope. Just a piece of paper, folded once, her name written on the outside in handwriting. She didn't recognize. She unfolded it. 2 lines. Printed this time. Your reports from 4 years ago. They weren't archived. They were moved. Ask yourself who had the clearance to move them, and who at this hospital made a call to Richard Vance on Thursday morning before your meeting. Emma read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in her pocket, and went back to work. She did not look at Donna. But for the rest of the shift, she was aware of her supervisor's location in the department the way you become aware of a specific sound that doesn't belong. Not conspicuously, not dramatically, just constantly, sitting in the back of the room behind every other thought, waiting. Someone inside the hospital had made a call to Richard Vance. Emma had been in that building for 5 years. She knew its rhythms, its politics, its alliances. She knew who covered for whom, and who reported to whom, and which conversations happened in which rooms when people wanted them to be private. She thought about that for the rest of her shift. She thought about it in her car driving home through the dark, with the Elk Range invisible above the tree line and the first real cold of the season settling into the valley floor. And she thought about a 9-year-old Malinois with a badly healed hip fracture, walking on it for more than a year, managing the pain the way trained animals do, quietly, completely, without making it anyone else's problem. Until he walked into a room and found the one person who was actually going to look. Emma drove home. She did not take the direct route. She took 3 extra turns through town, checking her mirrors at each one, watching the same headlights for 2 turns before making a third. Nobody followed her. But she checked anyway. Because whoever Richard Vance was, and whoever had sent him to that meeting, and whoever had made the call from inside Silver Ridge Medical Center, they had moved fast. 14 hours from note to meeting, clean, coordinated, no wasted steps. That wasn't improvisation. That was a system. And somewhere inside the hospital where she had worked for 5 years, part of that system had been sitting across from her at staff meetings and shift briefings and performance reviews, wearing the face of someone she thought she knew. She slept 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough, but because her body eventually stopped cooperating with the part of her brain that wanted to keep running the same calculations through the same variables and arriving at the same place. Someone inside Silver Ridge Medical Center had made a call to Richard Vance, and Emma had worked alongside that person for an unknown amount of time, and she did not yet know which face to attach to that fact. At 4 a.m., she gave up on the bed, made coffee she didn't taste, and sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open and a second notebook she retrieved from the bottom of her winter gear bag. Older, the cover worn soft, the first 30 pages filled with handwriting from 4 years ago in a different state. She hadn't opened it since she moved to Colorado. She opened it now. The 14 case files she'd documented were all there. Her original notation, cross-references between Meridian's evaluation records and the active duty medical histories she'd accessed during her government contract. Histories she'd been cleared to read, histories she'd read carefully, histories that told a different story than the retirement paperwork told. Dogs with documented field injuries appearing healthy in Meridian's processing. Dogs with chronic conditions that vanished from paper somewhere between active service and retirement clearance. One dog, she'd used the designation K91 in her notes, not his actual name because she hadn't let herself use the names. With a spinal compression injury confirmed by 2 independent military veterinarians who had then watched Meridian's evaluators produce a retirement document that described the animal's spine as unremarkable. K91 had been adopted by his handler, had lived 11 months, had deteriorated in a way the handler described. In the statement Emma had collected and filed as like watching someone slowly disappear. She had submitted that statement with her 43-page report. The report had been archived into a retrieval index that didn't exist. She sat with the 2 notebooks side by side, the old one and the new one, and thought about the note she'd found on her keyboard yesterday afternoon. They weren't archived, they were moved. Ask yourself who had the clearance to move them. Someone had the clearance. Someone in the department she'd filed with, or someone connected to that department, someone with the specific administrative access to locate a submitted report and transfer it out of the standard indexing structure before a supervisor could pull it for review. That wasn't a low-level operation. That was deliberate file management by someone who understood how government document systems worked and who had reason to care that this particular report disappeared. And that same someone, or someone connected to them, had a relationship with Richard Vance. And Vance had arrived at Silver Ridge Medical Center within hours of Emma opening Lucas's manila envelope. She wrote this down in the new notebook. Linear, numbered, the way she'd been trained to document, not because anyone was going to read it, but because the act of writing imposed an order on information that made gaps visible. When she'd finished, she looked at what she had. The gap was Vance himself. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know who had sent him. She didn't know whether the hospital call that had reached him had come from Donna or from someone else entirely. She needed that information before she moved. She closed both notebooks, finished the coffee, and by 5:15 a.m. was back in her car driving toward the hospital through an October dark that smelled like incoming weather. The storm arrived mid-morning. It came in from the northwest the way Colorado storms always did, fast, with the particular arrogance of weather that doesn't negotiate. And by 10 a.m., the hospital windows were running with driven rain that turned the mountain views to gray suggestion. The ER picked up the way it always did when the weather shifted. 2 vehicle incidents from the highway, a construction worker with a hand injury from a site that should have been shut down 2 hours before the rain arrived. The usual escalation of people who'd been ignoring something physical and decided the miserable weather was finally sufficient reason to address it. Emma worked through all of it. She was good in high-volume stretches. Not because she was fast, exactly, but because she didn't waste motion. Every decision landed where it was supposed to. Every handoff was clean. Navarro, working the adjacent bay, said nothing to her directly, but twice redirected a confused resident toward Emma's assessment rather than his own, which was the closest he ever came to a compliment. At 11:40 a.m., 2 people Emma had never seen before appeared at the nursing station, a man and a woman, both in their mid-40s. The man was wearing a gray jacket over a blue shirt, carrying a laptop bag that had the worn-in look of something that traveled constantly. The woman was in dark slacks and a blazer that might have been trying for civilian, but sat wrong on her shoulders, the specific wrongness of someone who normally wore something with more structure. They had credentials on lanyards that they hadn't displayed yet, and they were looking at Emma with the focused directional attention of people who had arrived knowing exactly who they were looking for. The woman reached the station first. Emma Carter? Yes, Emma said. Special Agent Diane Reyes, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. She produced a credential wallet. Real, not theatrical. the kind that gets handed to you when you've been working a case for long enough that the credential has its own wear patterns. This is my partner, Agent Frank Olson. We'd like to speak with you, privately, if possible. Emma looked at them for exactly the amount of time it took her to determine that this was not Vance's operation. The posture was different, the credential agency was different, and most importantly, they had introduced themselves by name immediately, which was not what people who were trying to manage her did. "There's a consultation room off the main corridor," she said. "Give me 3 minutes." She handed her current chart to the charge nurse without explanation. The charge nurse was competent, it didn't require one, and led Reyes and Olson down the corridor and into the consultation room, which was designed for physicians talking to families and therefore had no windows to the main floor and a door that closed completely. Reyes sat. Olson remained standing near the door, which wasn't aggressive. It was positional habit, the way people who spend a lot of time in variable environments orient themselves toward exits. "We've been working a contracting fraud investigation for 7 months, Reyes said. She opened her laptop directly, not preambling further, which Emma appreciated. Meridian Veterinary Contracting. We traced a financial irregularity in their DoD billing to a documentation pattern. Evaluation reports that show consistent pass rates significantly above what independent veterinary data would predict for the same animal demographics." "How far above?" Emma said. 94% pass rate across 1,200 evaluations over 6 years. The independent benchmark for comparable animals in comparable service profiles runs around 61%. Emma absorbed that. 30-point spread, she said. "Across 1,200 animals," Olson said from the door. His voice was quieter than Reyes. "That's not statistical drift. That's a policy." 4 days ago, Reyes continued, "our data search flagged a retired military working dog currently located in Pitkin County, under the custody of a former ranger named Lucas Hayes. The animal's service profile put him in a high probability bracket for evaluation discrepancy. We were going to approach Hayes directly." She paused. "Then our system flagged an existing document cross-reference, a report submitted 4 years ago to the DoD's Office of Inspector General by an Emma Carter, then holding a government veterinary services contract, documenting 14 case files with apparent evaluation irregularities produced by Meridian." She looked at Emma steadily. "That report was not in the standard OIG archive. It was in a restricted transfer folder that required a specific clearance level to access. We found it 6 weeks ago." Emma said nothing. "Ms. Carter," Reyes said, "we think you already know most of what we're about to tell you, but I need to understand what you know, what you have, and what actions you've taken in the last 72 hours. Because someone in or connected to this hospital made contact with a man named Richard Vance on Thursday morning, and Richard Vance is a name that appears in our investigation." The room was very quiet, rain against the building, the distant PA of the hospital going about its ordinary work. "Vance was here," Emma said. "Yesterday morning, Okafor introduced him as hospital legal counsel." Reyes and Olson exchanged a brief look, not surprised, but confirming. "He's not hospital legal counsel," Reyes said. "I know," Emma said. "What he is," Olson said, "is a private investigator with a client history that runs through 3 different shell companies, 2 of which have financial connections to Meridian's parent contracting group." Emma put her hands flat on the table, not a gesture of anything except the need to do something physical, while she processed the particular satisfaction of a gap filling in. "He was sent to assess what I knew and whether I could be warned off," she said. "Or what evidence you might have in your possession," Reyes said, "and whether the hospital could be leveraged to remove you from a position to act on it." A pause. "Ms. Carter, the call to Vance, it came from a phone registered to this hospital's administrative network. We have the records. We know it happened. We don't yet know which individual made it." Emma thought about Donna, about the careful look on Donna's face when Emma had returned from the Okafor meeting, about the way Donna had redirected her to the trauma, admit immediately, efficiently, the way you redirect someone when you want them occupied and not thinking. She thought about 5 years of being managed, redirected, minimized, about the specific texture of working alongside someone who was doing 2 jobs and only showing you one of them. She said, "I have a notebook with my observations from the Hayes admission and the Meridian evaluation documents he gave me. I have independent imaging results from a veterinary radiologist in Glenwood Springs confirming a badly healed hip fracture in the animal that Meridian's evaluation describes as fully healthy. And I have documentation from 4 years ago, 14 case files, that I kept in physical form. Reyes was typing. The imaging results, when were they produced? Yesterday morning, Dr. Elena Arriaga, Glenwood Springs Veterinary Imaging. Lucas Hayes was present. She has the originals. Can Hayes get those to us? I'll call him. Emma paused. There's something else. She produced the folded note from her pocket, the one left on her keyboard. She slid it across the table to Reyes. Reyes read it, showed it to Olson without getting up, simply angling it toward him. He read it. Neither of them said anything immediately. Someone inside this investigation knows you, Olson said finally. Someone inside this investigation knows about me, Emma said. That's not necessarily the same thing. Reyes looked at her for a moment with an expression that was the closest thing to approval Emma had seen from a federal agent since the one who'd taken her original report 4 years ago and then stopped returning her calls. We're going to need a formal statement, Reyes said, and we're going to need you to continue your normal work pattern here. Don't change your behavior, don't alter your access to the building, don't do anything that signals to whoever made that call that the situation has changed. You want me to act like I don't know about Vance, Emma said. We want you to act like you're a nurse doing her job, Reyes said, which, from what I can tell, you're very good at. Emma looked at her steadily. You should know that warning me off usually has the opposite of its intended effect. I got that impression from your file, Reyes said, not unkindly. Lucas arrived at the hospital at 2 p.m. Emma had called him from the stairwell at 12:20, keeping it brief. Federal investigators, DCIS, legitimate, bring Arriaga's report, come in person. He'd said 4 words. How long do I have? She'd said 90 minutes. He'd arrived in 83. He looked different than he had at discharge. Not physically, the arm was healing correctly, but in the specific way that people look when they've spent time since you last saw them, thinking hard about something they can't resolve. The focused inward quality of a problem that isn't getting smaller. Ghost was with him. Reyes's eyebrows moved slightly when the Malinois came through the consultation room door, but she said nothing. Ghost went directly to the corner of the room farthest from the door, not anxious, just choosing the position with the best sightlines, and lay down. Lucas put Arriaga's report on the table without preamble. 2 copies. Other ones at my place in a fireproof lockbox. He looked at Reyes. What do you need? Start with the evaluation timeline, Reyes said. When did you first notice something was wrong with him? Lucas talked for 20 minutes. Emma sat to his left and said nothing, because he was telling it more completely than she could have told it for him. The 8 months of watching Ghost compensate, the specific moments that had nagged at him, the way he'd rationalized it as aging because the alternative required him to distrust an official government document and everybody who'd signed off on it. He was precise about dates, precise about behaviors, the way someone trained in after-action reporting is precise, not because he was trying to be helpful, but because accuracy was the only register he had for things that mattered. Olson was taking notes. Reyes was recording on her phone, which she'd placed on the table with Lucas's visual consent before he started. When Lucas finished, Reyes looked at Emma. Your turn. Emma talked for 35 minutes. She started with 4 years ago. The government contract, the case files, the report, the meeting with the man behind the desk, who had noted her concerns and then ensured they went nowhere. She talked about the decision to leave, the nursing boards, Colorado. She talked about Tuesday night, Ghost coming through the doors, the specific movement pattern she'd noticed in the first 5 minutes. She talked about the Meridian evaluation documents, the 3 specific discrepancies, the way the range of motion values corresponded to template placeholders rather than measured data. She talked about the phone call on the hospital internal line, the note on Lucas's truck, the note on her keyboard. She talked about Donna. Not conclusively. She was careful about that. I don't know that Donna Marsh made the call to Vance, she said. I know the call came from the hospital's administrative network. I know Donna has been in administrative level positions here for 11 years. I know she redirected me immediately after the Okafor meeting in a way that felt managed. And I know she looked at me differently yesterday afternoon, after the note appeared on my keyboard. She paused. That's observation, not evidence. Let us worry about what constitutes evidence, Reyes said. I understand the distinction, Emma said. I'm telling you what I observed so you can decide how to use it. I'm not telling you she's guilty. I'm telling you she behaved like someone who knew something had happened that afternoon when nobody else in that department should have known. Reyes nodded, made a note. Lucas had been watching Emma through this whole section of her account with the expression of someone recalibrating a map, updating terrain information. She saw him do it and said nothing about it. The meeting ended at 3:45 p.m. Reyes collected the documents, photographed them with a DCIS issue camera rather than her phone, and returned the originals to Lucas. She gave Emma a card with a cell number handwritten on the back, separate from the office number printed on the front. Cell only from here, Reyes said. Don't call the main line. Understood, Emma said. At the door, Reyes stopped, turned back. One more thing. The person who left you the note on your keyboard, they wrote that the reports were moved, not archived. That's not information that's in any file we've been able to access. Whoever wrote that note knows the internal structure of how those documents were handled. She looked at Emma carefully, which means they're connected to whatever is protecting Meridian, and they chose to give you that information rather than use it. Emma had already thought about this. Someone inside who's scared, she said. Or someone who's been inside long enough that they want out, Olson said from behind Reyes. After they left, Emma and Lucas stood in the consultation room for a moment with the rain still going at the windows and Ghost watching them from his corner. You okay? Lucas said. Yes, Emma said. Are you? No, he said honestly, but I will be. He glanced at Ghost, who had gotten up and was moving toward the door with the careful, deliberate gait that was already slightly different from how he'd moved 5 days ago. Arriaga had adjusted his pain management protocol pending surgery, and it was already showing. He trusts you, Lucas said. Not for the first time, but differently than before. He trusted me first, Emma said. I just caught up. Lucas almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but it was close. 3 days passed. Emma worked her shifts. She spoke to Donna with the same measured neutrality she'd always used, gave her nothing different to read, completed her documentation with the same completeness. She watched Donna the way she watched everything, without appearing to watch, with the specific, unfocused peripheral awareness of someone who has learned that people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they're not being observed. Donna was careful. More careful than usual, Emma thought, though she acknowledged she might be reading that into the data. But there were small things. The way Donna's eyes tracked to Emma's locker twice during a shift change without any apparent reason. The way she had stopped making the minor administrative criticisms that had been her habitual register for 5 years, stopped them completely, as if she'd been told to reduce her footprint. The way she asked, casually, on the second day, whether Emma had heard anything further from that Hayes patient. No, Emma had said. Why? Just following up. We had a concern about documentation from that admission. I know, we addressed it with Dr. Okafor. Right. A pause. Of course. Emma had moved on, but she noted it. On the 4th day, Reyes called the cell number. We have enough to move, Reyes said. She didn't lead with pleasantries. Emma appreciated this. The imaging report combined with your documentation and Hayes' statement gives us a current, provable falsification. We're getting a subpoena for Meridian's full evaluation database, all 1,200 files. Our financial forensics team has already connected 2 Meridian executives to a billing structure that systematically avoided the DoD's mandatory secondary review threshold. How? Emma asked. She was in her car, early morning, before her shift. They kept the dollar value of each individual evaluation just below the automatic audit trigger. Across 1,200 evaluations, 6 years, it adds up to just under $3 million in fraudulently billed services. But more than the money, Reyes paused. The falsification pattern connects to a military oversight official, GS-15, DoD Veterinary Services Division. He co-signed the regulatory framework that Meridian operated under. He also has a financial relationship with one of the shell companies I mentioned. Emma stared at the windshield. He approved the framework that made their evaluations uncontestable, she said, and then made sure that any internal reports challenging the evaluations were transferred to a restricted archive where they'd require his specific clearance level to retrieve. A pause. A report, for example, submitted by a contract employee 4 years ago. Emma's hands were very still on the steering wheel. His name is Arthur Kellner, Reyes said. He's been in the position for 9 years. He was in the position when I filed, Emma said. Yes. And he personally transferred my report. Yes. Emma sat with that for a moment. The mountain outside was bright with new snow from the storm, the kind of clean white that looked deliberate. When are you moving on this? She said. We need the Meridian database first. Subpoena is being executed today. A beat. There's a complication. What? The subpoena requires Meridian to produce the database from their central records system, standard process. But our technical team is flagging that their server architecture has a secondary backup that's not covered by the subpoena's scope as written. If someone at Meridian or connected to Meridian gets advance notice, they'll move the data to the secondary system, Emma said, and you'll have the primary records, which are probably already sanitized. Yes, Reyes's voice was flat and careful. We believe someone in the U.S. Attorney's Office pipeline has a connection to Kellner. We don't know who. We're working on it. A pause. What this means for you is that the next 48 hours are the period of highest risk. If Kellner or Meridian believe the subpoena is coming and that you're a central witness, I understand, Emma said. We're putting eyes on the hospital, Reyes said. Plain clothes. You won't necessarily see them, but they'll be there. And Lucas? Olson is in contact with him. He's aware. Emma nodded to herself. The person who left me the note, she said. Have you identified them? A beat of silence that lasted slightly too long. We have a working theory, Reyes said. I'm not going to share it right now. I don't want it affecting how you interact with people at the hospital. It's someone at the hospital, Emma said. I'm not going to… You just told me not to let it affect how I interact with people at the hospital, Emma said. That means it's someone at the hospital. Reyes said nothing for a moment. Then, don't let it affect anything. 48 hours. She ended the call. Emma sat for another minute. Then she got out of the car and went into the building. The shift started normally. By noon, it was still normal, which was starting to feel like its own kind of wrong. The specific hyper-alertness of waiting for something, where every ordinary thing looks ordinary, but you're cataloging it anyway, because you don't know yet which ordinary thing is the one that matters. At 1:15 p.m., Lucas texted her personal phone. 3 words. Olson not responding. Emma read it twice, pocketed the phone, kept moving. At 1:34 p.m., her phone buzzed again. Lucas. Call me when you can. She went to the stairwell, called him. He picked up on the first ring. Olson missed our check-in, Lucas said. We had a noon call scheduled. He didn't pick up. I called Reyes. She's not picking up either. I've been trying for an hour. How long have you had the check-in arrangement? Since the day after the meeting, noon and 6 p.m. Emma thought. Where are you right now? Hospital parking structure. I was coming to return Arriaga's second report copy. Reyes wanted it in a federal evidence file rather than my lockbox. Stay in the structure. Don't come inside yet. She paused. Have you seen anything different around your property in the last 48 hours? A truck, Lucas said. Parked on the road past my driveway last night. Dark blue, Colorado plates. I ran the plate. It's registered to a rental company. I told Olson at yesterday's 6 o'clock check-in. Emma leaned against the stairwell wall. Outside the building, through the gap at the parking level, the mountain had gone gray again. Second storm, maybe, coming faster than the forecast. The truck was there last night, she said, and this morning Olson doesn't pick up. I know what it sounds like, Lucas said. His voice had gone very flat, the particular flatness she recognized now as his operational register, when he stopped inflecting and started moving. I'm not panicking. I'm telling you the data. I believe you, Emma said. Don't go anywhere. Let me think. She thought. If the subpoena had leaked, if Kellner or Meridian knew it was coming, and if they believed Lucas Hayes and Emma Carter were the primary witnesses connecting the falsification to a current, provable case, then the window before official action was exactly the window where pressure could be applied. 48 hours, Reyes had said, highest risk period, and now Reyes wasn't picking up. Lucas, she said. Yeah. The documents Arriaga mailed to Reyes, the federal evidence copy. Not mailed. Olson said he'd pick them up personally today. He was supposed to come to Arriaga's office this morning. Emma closed her eyes briefly, not from surprise. The documents are still at Arriaga's office. Unless Olson picked them up before he... Lucas stopped. I don't know if Olson picked them up. She said, call Arriaga, right now, while I'm on the line. Find out if Olson came this morning. She heard him dial on a second line, the hold, then his voice, brief, asking, then silence. Olson never came, Lucas said. Emma's next breath was completely controlled because she had learned a long time ago that the moment when things accelerate was the wrong moment to let your physiology run ahead of your thinking. Call Arriaga back, she said. Tell her to take the documents and leave her office. Not home, somewhere public, with people, and she should not tell us where unless we ask on a voice call, not text. She paused. Tell her to go now, not in 5 minutes. She heard Lucas relay this. Heard Arriaga's voice through the phone, the register of confusion becoming alarm. She's going, Lucas said. Good. Emma was already moving, heading up the stairs toward the floor where, somewhere in the administrative wing, a person had made a phone call to Richard Vance and had been careful ever since. Lucas, the note on my keyboard. Someone inside this hospital left it. Reyes said they had a theory. If that person knows what's happening right now... She stopped at the third-floor landing. If they're scared enough to warn me and not act openly, they're probably scared right now, today, specifically. You think they'll do something? I think they might, Emma said. And I think whether they do or not is going to determine how the next 48 hours goes. She pushed through the stairwell door. Stay in the structure. Keep your phone on. She walked out into the third-floor corridor, past the nursing station where Donna was standing with a chart in her hands and her eyes on Emma the moment Emma appeared, as if she'd been watching the stairwell door, waiting for it to open. Their eyes met. Donna looked away first. Emma kept walking. She went to the medication room, the one place on the floor with a door that locked from inside and a gap of 3 minutes before anyone would notice she hadn't emerged. She locked the door. She called Reyes's cell. It rang 4 times. 5. 6. On the 7th ring, it picked up. But it wasn't Reyes. A man's voice, not Olson, not anyone she knew, smooth even, and carrying the particular quality of someone who wanted her to understand something without having to state it directly. Ms. Carter, the voice said, Agent Reyes is unavailable. I'd encourage you not to read too much into that, but I would encourage you to think carefully about the next decision you make. Emma stood in the locked medication room with rain starting against the single high window and her heartbeat completely, professionally steady. Who is this? She said. Someone who'd like this to resolve quietly, the man said. You've worked very hard. We understand that. But the documentation you're relying on is incomplete, and the witnesses you're counting on are not in positions to help you right now. The most useful thing you can do... Where is Agent Reyes? Emma said. Is to step back and let the proper oversight channels. Where is Agent Reyes? Emma said again, exactly the same tone, exactly the same volume. The man stopped. A half-second of silence that was also a kind of answer. This doesn't have to be difficult, he said. Emma said, I'm going to end this call now, and then I'm going to do what I was already going to do. She ended the call. She stood for exactly 4 seconds in the locked medication room. Then she unlocked the door, walked out into the corridor, and went straight to Donna Marsh. Donna was still at the nursing station. She was holding the chart but not reading it. When Emma stopped in front of her, Donna's eyes came up with the specific quality of someone who has been waiting for an approach they can't decide whether to welcome or flee. Emma leaned forward slightly, kept her voice completely level. I know you left the note, she said. On my keyboard. You wrote it. Donna's face did something complicated and very fast. Denial starting and stopping before it could arrive. The architecture of a held position collapsing under the specific weight of being seen clearly. I need you to listen to me, Emma said. Whatever you were told would happen if you stayed quiet. It's happening anyway. The people you're protecting can't protect you back. They never could. A pause. And the people who are coming after them need to know what you know. Donna stared at her. The nursing station hummed. The rain hit the windows. Down the corridor, someone's monitor alarm went off, and then was silenced. I have a daughter, Donna said. Her voice was almost inaudible. They said, I know, Emma said. She didn't know. But she knew the shape of it, the specific lever that people who operate through corruption find and press. Tell me what you know, Donna. Right now, not later. Donna looked at her for one more second. Then she started talking. And what she said changed the geometry of everything, because Donna hadn't just made one call to Richard Vance. She'd been making calls for 3 years, passing information about unusual patient admissions, about staff who asked certain kinds of questions, to a number she'd been given by someone she'd never met in person and had been told to treat as routine administrative oversight. She hadn't known what she was part of. She hadn't asked. And now she was asking 4 years too late, in a hospital corridor in the rain, with her hands shaking around a chart she hadn't read in 10 minutes. Emma took out her phone. She did not call Reyes's number. She called the secondary number Reyes had written on the back of the card at their first meeting, a number Reyes had mentioned, offhandedly, as belonging to a DCIS supervisor who served as the investigation's oversight contact. Someone above the pipeline that might be compromised. Someone Reyes had built in as a redundant contact specifically because she knew the investigation had exposure points she hadn't fully mapped. It rang twice. A woman picked up. Harmon. My name is Emma Carter, Emma said. I'm a nurse at Silver Ridge Medical Center in Aspen Valley, Colorado. I'm a witness in a DCIS investigation led by Agent Diane Reyes. Agent Reyes is not reachable. I have a cooperating witness at my location who has information relevant to the investigation's internal exposure. And I need you to tell me that Agent Reyes is alive. A pause, short but real. She's alive, Harmon said. Her voice had changed from the professional neutral it had started at, more focused, more present. What's your location? Emma gave it. Don't move, Harmon said. We're 40 minutes out. I'll be here, Emma said. She ended the call, put the phone in her pocket, and looked at Donna. Okay, Emma said. Let's start from the beginning. Donna talked for 22 minutes. Emma let her go without interrupting, which was harder than it sounds. Not because the information wasn't useful, but because Donna kept stopping to explain herself, to contextualize her choices, to build small scaffolding around what she'd done so that Emma would understand it wasn't what it looked like. Emma understood this impulse. She also understood that the scaffolding was Donna's problem to carry, not hers to help construct. So she listened, and she did not offer absolution, and she did not tell Donna it was okay, because it wasn't okay, and they both knew it, and the kindest thing Emma could do right now was let Donna say the actual words without softening them. The actual words were these. 3 years ago, a man had approached Donna at a medical administration conference in Denver. Not Vance. Someone above Vance, she'd never learned his name, and the number she'd been given routed through a call forwarding system that she'd never tried to trace. He had presented himself as part of a DoD contractor oversight program that monitored hospitals near military communities for potential fraud referrals. He had told Donna that her role was simple. If any staff member made inquiries that touched on military contracting, military working dog programs, or Department of Defense veterinary services, she was to note it and report it through the number she'd been given. Routine administrative intelligence, protecting taxpayers. She had believed this for 14 months. Then she had started noticing what happened to the staff members she reported. Not dramatically. No one disappeared, no one was arrested, nothing that would constitute visible harm. But the pattern was there if you looked. A nurse practitioner who'd asked too many questions about a veteran patient's disability claim had received a credentialing complication that delayed her next position by 4 months. A resident who'd noted inconsistencies in a contractor's equipment billing had found his medical school loan provider conducting an unexpected audit. Small things. The specific small frictions that systems apply to people they want to slow down without appearing to stop them. Donna had continued reporting for another 10 months after she understood what she was part of. This was the part she couldn't quite scaffold around, the part where the contextualization collapsed, and Emma watched it happen. Watched Donna's face when she reached that section of the account, the way her eyes moved away and her hands tightened on the chart she was still holding. My daughter's college applications were pending, Donna said. The man called. He mentioned the university by name. He didn't threaten anything. He just mentioned it. Emma said nothing. I know, Donna said. I know you know, Emma said. After that, Donna told her everything she could remember. Dates, the types of calls, what she'd reported, who she'd reported on. She told Emma that after the Tuesday admission, she'd reported Lucas Hayes' name and Emma's involvement within 2 hours. She told Emma that she'd been the one to tell Vance that Emma had documents in her possession because Vance had called her directly at 5 a.m. Thursday and told her it was urgent, and she told Emma one more thing. "There's a room," she said, "sub-basement, the old record storage from before we digitized. It hasn't been used as active storage in 8 years, but last month, the maintenance supervisor told me someone had requested access to it through the hospital's external contractor system for document archiving services." She paused. "The contractor name was Ashell. I looked it up after the note. It didn't exist." Emma looked at her. "You think someone is using the room?" "I went down there 2 days ago," Donna said. "I didn't go in, but the lock had been changed." She swallowed. "The original lock was a master key system. The new one is a keypad." Emma's phone buzzed. Lucas, from the parking structure. "Everything okay?" She typed back, "Stay put, 30 minutes. To Donna, she said, "Does the maintenance supervisor know you looked into it?" "No, I went alone." "Okay." Emma thought for approximately 4 seconds. "When Harmon's team gets here, you're going to tell them everything you told me. Word for word, in order, including the parts about your daughter and the 10 months. Don't edit it, don't shape it. Just say it the same way you just said it to me." "Will I?" Donna started. "I don't know," Emma said honestly. "That's not my determination to make. But telling the truth from this point forward is the only move that has any upside for you." She paused. "I'm not saying it gets you clear. I'm saying it's the only direction that isn't worse." Donna nodded. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but her face had taken on a different quality. Not resolved, not okay, but past the point of active internal collapse. Sometimes that was what honesty did to people. Not relief, just the specific solidity of having finally put a thing down. Emma said, "The sub-basement room." "Which corridor?" Attempt. Harmon arrived in 38 minutes with 4 agents and a federal prosecutor named Soo Jin Park, who wore running shoes under her blazer and had the manner of someone who had been eating lunch at her desk when the call came in and considered this a completely acceptable interruption. Reyes was not with them, which Emma noted before anything else. "She's okay," Harmon said, reading Emma's face accurately. "Reyes and Olson were run off Route 82 this morning. Olson has a concussion. Reyes has 2 broken ribs and a very bad attitude about being in a hospital bed when she should be here." She said this with the efficiency of someone who cared about both agents and was therefore dispensing the information as quickly as possible and moving on. "You called the right number." "She gave it to me specifically as a backup," Emma said. "I know, that's not a small thing, given where we are." Harmon was already moving through the hospital corridor with the forward momentum of someone who had made the building her operational space the moment she entered it. Early 50s, the kind of compact physical presence that doesn't announce itself until the moment it decides to. "Carter, walk me through the sub-basement." Emma walked her through it. Then she walked her through Donna's account. Then, in Harmon's temporary command post, the consultation room from earlier, which had apparently become the de facto federal staging area, she sat across from Park and went through her own complete account for the 3rd time in 4 days. This time with a recording device that was introduced formally and a written acknowledgement that she'd been identified as a cooperating witness. Park listened with a legal pad in front of her that she wrote on sparingly, only the most load-bearing details, dates, specific names. When Emma finished, Park put her pen down and said, "The phone call you received on Agent Reyes' cell. Describe the voice." Emma described it. Park wrote 2 words on the legal pad, showed them to Harmon. Harmon's jaw set. "Does that mean something to you?" Emma asked. "We'll tell you when we can," Park said. Not dismissive, factual. "I want to move on the sub-basement room tonight. What's your read on the hospital's physical layout?" Emma laid it out. Sub-basement access, 2 entry points, a stairwell in the north wing, and a service elevator that required a physical key in addition to the floor button. The service elevator key was managed through physical security, which meant it had a checkout log. Emma had worked long enough at Silver Ridge to know that the log was kept manually, a paper binder at the security desk, because the deputy chief of security was 61 years old and thought digital logs were an invitation for hackers. "The checkout log for the elevator," Harmon said. "Can we get it without alerting your security team?" I know the deputy chief, Emma said. He goes to lunch at 12:30 and doesn't come back until 1:45. His second logs everything electronically, which means she's not looking at the paper binder at all. Emma paused. I could have the binder to you in 6 minutes. Harmon looked at her for a moment with an expression that was thoughtful rather than surprised. You move around this building like you've been mapping it. I've been working here for 5 years, Emma said. That's not why, Harmon said. Not an accusation, an observation. Emma didn't respond to it directly. Do you want the binder? Yes, Harmon said. Emma got the binder. 6 minutes exactly. The checkout log for the sub-basement service elevator showed 3 entries in the past 6 weeks under an external contractor code, a code that, when Park ran it against the hospital's vendor database, matched the same shell company Donna had identified. Each entry was timed between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Last entry, 3 days ago. Someone's been down there at night, Olson said, and Emma looked up to find him in the doorway, which was unexpected. He was moving with the particular careful balance of a man managing a concussion, one hand on the doorframe, color not quite right, but upright and present. She thought about telling him he should be in a hospital bed and then understood that he was already in a hospital. You're supposed to be, Harmon started. I'm fine, Olson said, the universal statement of people who are not fine, but have decided it's irrelevant. I want to be in the room. He looked at Emma. You got Arriaga's documents secured? Yes. Good. He came fully into the room and sat down heavily in the chair nearest the door. What are we doing about the sub-basement? They went down at 9 p.m. Emma was not supposed to be part of it. Harmon had been clear. The federal team goes in. Emma stays on the clinical level and maintains her normal presence pattern. Emma had agreed to this, which she considered a reasonable position, given that she had no law enforcement authority, and Harmon's team had 4 agents and a federal mandate. Then, at 8:47 p.m., Harmon's radio had crackled with a technical problem. The keypad lock on the sub-basement room used a model that their electronic bypass tool wasn't reading correctly. Old system, custom installation, not in the federal equipment database. They needed someone who knew the hospital's physical infrastructure. Emma had gone to the deputy chief's second, a woman named Teresa, who had been doing her actual job for 15 years, while the deputy chief went to lunch for 90-minute stretches, and had asked a single specific question about the hospital's legacy keypad vendor contracts. Teresa had provided the answer in 40 seconds and gone back to her screen without curiosity, because Teresa was the kind of person who answered questions efficiently and didn't generate extra ones. Emma had brought the answer to Harmon. Harmon had looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. You're staying in the corridor, she said. Completely fine, Emma said. The sub-basement smelled like concrete and old paper and the specific mineral damp of a space that hadn't been properly ventilated in years. The corridor lights were on motion sensors. They triggered as the team moved forward, the kind of triggering that announced presence to anyone paying attention, which meant either whoever used this room wasn't using it tonight or they'd disabled the sensors near their specific location. The room was the 4th door on the left. The keypad was exactly the model Teresa had described. Harmon's agent used the bypass sequence Emma had relayed, and the door opened on the first attempt. Emma was in the corridor, 10 feet back, and she could not see into the room from where she was standing. She could see Harmon's face when Harmon looked inside. Harmon's face told her enough. What they found, she would learn the specifics later, in a formal debrief, was a portable document archive, a fireproof storage case, a portable scanner, and approximately 300 pages of physical documents that had been systematically processed through the scanner and were queued for electronic transmission to an external server address. The documents were Meridian evaluation files, not the sanitized versions in the primary database, originals, the actual assessment records, pre-falsification, the before versions, the ones that showed the real measurements, the real diagnoses, the real medical histories of animals that had then been documented as healthy for retirement clearance. Someone had been sitting on the before versions, using them possibly as insurance, or preparing to transmit them somewhere that wasn't the DCIS database, somewhere that would receive them not as evidence against Meridian, but as leverage for someone who needed leverage. One of Harmon's agents was on the radio immediately. 2 others were photographing everything in place before anything moved. And then, Emma heard this before she saw it, There was movement from the far end of the corridor. The other access point, the north wing stairwell door, opening. A figure, moving fast when they saw the lights, the agents, the open room, turning to run. One of Harmon's agents was already in motion, and it wasn't a chase exactly. The corridor was 60 feet long, and the stairwell door required a badge swipe to open from outside, which the running figure's badge apparently didn't clear because they hit the door, swiped again, and by then Harmon's agent was there. Emma, from her position in the corridor, saw the figure's face when they turned. She didn't recognize him, but Harmon did. She heard it in Harmon's voice when she came out of the room and identified the man. A single word, a name, said in the tone of someone confirming something they'd suspected but hadn't proven. The man's name, she would learn, was Dale Fitch. He was listed as an external IT contractor for Silver Ridge Medical Center. He was also, under a different name in a different state, a licensed document management specialist with a client history that ran through the same shell company network as Vance. He had been transmitting the before versions to a private server controlled by Arthur Kellner, not as evidence, as Kellner's personal insurance, the actual records that would implicate not just Meridian's evaluators, but the DoD officials and military oversight personnel whose names appeared in the pre-falsification files as signatories on original assessments. Kellner had been collecting leverage on everyone above him in the corruption chain, preparing an exit strategy that protected him by making himself too dangerous to prosecute. The documents in that sub-basement room were not a cover-up, they were a weapon being loaded. The formal debrief happened the next morning, not at the hospital, at the Pitkin County Federal Building in Glenwood Springs. A 40-minute drive that Emma made in her own car, following a DCIS vehicle, arriving at 8 a.m. in the kind of clean, cold October morning that Colorado produces when it's not producing storms. Park was there. Harmon was there. 2 additional federal attorneys and a representative from the DoD Inspector General's office who had flown in overnight from Washington. Reyes was there too. She was seated when Emma arrived. She wouldn't stand if she could help it. Emma understood 2 broken ribs meant every vertical transition was a negotiation, and she looked like someone who had slept approximately as much as Emma had, which was to say not enough, but whose eyes were sharp and whose legal pad was already half filled before the meeting started. "Carter," Reyes said. "How are your ribs?" Emma said. "Annoying," Reyes said. "Sit down." Emma sat. The debrief ran 4 hours. It was thorough in the specific, exhausting way that legal proceedings always are. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the slow, careful architecture of building something that will hold weight in a courtroom. Emma gave her account in order, answered questions when they deviated from the order, asked for clarification twice when a question was ambiguous rather than guessing at what was being asked. She'd learned 4 years ago that guessing at legal questions was how accurate accounts became inaccurate. At hour 3, the DoD IG representative, a woman named Patricia Gould, who had the particular focused stillness of someone who had been doing investigative work long enough that surprise was no longer a resource she wasted, put a photograph on the table in front of Emma. "Do you recognize this person?" Gould asked. The photograph showed a man, mid-60s, silver hair, well cut. The specific appearance of institutional authority, not wealth exactly, but the kind of grooming that comes with decades of being taken seriously in rooms where decisions get made. "No," Emma said. "His name is Arthur Kellner. He's the GS-15 who transferred your report 4 years ago." Gould paused. "He was arrested this morning in Arlington, Virginia, along with the CEO of Meridian's parent company and 2 senior DoD contracting officials. Dale Fitch and Richard Vance are both in federal custody in Colorado." She let that sit for a moment. "Emma, your 43-page report from 4 years ago, the complete version, not the sanitized version in Kellner's restricted archive, was recovered from the before version documents in the sub-basement. Your original submission, every page." Emma looked at the photograph of Kellner. She thought about a man behind a desk who had told her smoothly that her concerns were noted. She thought about the particular weight of carrying something for 4 years that nobody with the authority to do anything about it would pick up. She looked at Gould and said, "What happens to the animals?" Gould blinked, just slightly. "I'm sorry?" "The 1,200 evaluations," Emma said. "The dogs who are still alive. How does this investigation create any mechanism for identifying which ones have undiagnosed injuries and getting them evaluated? The room was quiet for a moment. Park leaned forward. That's part of the remedy structure we're building, yes. Mandatory reevaluation of all living animals processed through Meridian in the 6-year window. By whom? Emma said. Not by DoD contracted evaluators operating under the same framework Kellner built. Independent Veterinary Board, Park said. We're working on the structure. Arriaga, Emma said. Elena Arriaga at Glenwood Springs Veterinary Imaging. She knows military working dog physiology. She's not connected to any DoD contracting network. She's good. She paused. I can give you other names. People from my time in government veterinary services who did the work correctly. Park wrote this down. Actually wrote it down, with the manner of someone who intended to use it. Reyes, from across the table, was watching Emma with an expression that was somewhere between professional assessment and something less categorizable. You've been sitting on those names for 4 years too, she said. I didn't have anyone to give them to, Emma said. You do now, Reyes said. She drove back to Aspen Valley at 1 p.m. The mountains were clear in the afternoon light. The second storm had moved through in the night and left the high country white above the tree line. She drove with the heat on and the radio off, thinking about nothing in particular, which was what her brain did when it had been running hard for too long and needed a few miles of neutral. Lucas had texted at 10 a.m. Arriaga confirmed surgery consult for Ghost. Next Thursday. Specialist from Denver. She'd replied, good. Then after a moment, tell him I said so. Lucas had sent back a single character, a period, which she understood after a moment, as the kind of punctuation that means acknowledged and nothing else. The way military communication used minimal characters to confirm receipt without adding noise. She thought about Ghost on the surgery table. She thought about a dog who had walked into a hospital at 2 in the morning and made a decision, not with language, not with anything that could be articulated, but with the specific bodily knowledge of an animal that has spent years reading people for threat and safety and had found, in a room full of scared humans, the one person who was not performing either. She didn't think of herself as particularly readable. She'd spent years working at being the opposite. But maybe that was it. Maybe the absence of performance was the thing. Maybe after enough time reading people for survival, you started to notice the ones who weren't managing their presentation for an audience. She pulled into the hospital parking structure at 1:47 p.m. She had not been told to come back to work. She had 3 days of personal leave accrued, and the DCIS case technically created a duty to cooperate status that Park had said might affect her availability for shifts. But she had not been told she couldn't come back, and she had patients who had been admitted under her care, and she had notes to complete. And she was, at the end of all of it, still a nurse in a hospital that still had people in it who needed nursing. So she went in. The ER floor was mid-afternoon busy. Not the chaos of the overnight, just the ordinary accumulation of people who had been in pain since morning and had finally run out of reasons to wait. She signed in at the nursing station and pulled her patient list and started moving. And for the first 40 minutes, nobody said anything to her about anything except what was in front of them, which was exactly what she needed. Then Navarro appeared at her elbow between bays. "Carter," he said low. He looked like he hadn't slept either, which meant he'd heard enough to know that something had happened, even if he didn't know all of it. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she said. "What actually happened?" She looked at him directly. Navarro was 53 years old, had been chief of the ER for 8 years, and had the specific relationship with Emma that develops between people who work high-volume medicine in close proximity for long enough. Not friendship exactly, more like the professional trust that builds when you've watched someone make good calls under pressure, enough times that you stop second-guessing their instincts. He had redirected the confused resident to her assessment. He had never, in 5 years, made her feel like the room got smaller when she walked in. "I can tell you most of it," she said. "But not right now. Tonight, if you want." He nodded. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Is the hospital safe?" "Yes." Fitch, the IT contractor, is in federal custody. Whatever he was doing in the sub-basement is done. Navarro absorbed this. The sub-basement. He said it with the specific tone of a man discovering that something significant had been happening in his building without his knowledge, which was the appropriate response. How long? At least 6 weeks based on the elevator log. He was quiet for a moment. Who knew? Emma looked at him. I'll tell you tonight, she said. He left her to her work. At 4:15 p.m., Okafor appeared. He came to the nursing station rather than summoning her to his office, which she noted. He stood on the patient side of the counter, which meant he wasn't positioning this as administrative. He looked like a man who had received a significant amount of information in the last 18 hours and was still working through its implications. Carter, he said. Dr. Okafor. A pause. He put both hands on the counter, which was the same posture as before, but different now. Less preparatory, more like he needed something solid. I introduced Richard Vance to you as hospital legal counsel, he said. I was told he was here as part of a routine insurance review that touched on the Hayes admission. A beat. I was lied to. Emma waited. I don't know how much you know about who told me that, Okafor said. I know some of it, Emma said. You'll probably get a call from a federal attorney named Park in the next few days. She'll tell you more. He nodded slowly. Is Marsh... He stopped, started again. What's going to happen to Donna? I don't know, Emma said. That's not my call. She's been here 11 years. I know. She... He stopped again. He seemed to be working against the instinct to contextualize it, the same instinct Donna had had, the human impulse to build scaffolding around uncomfortable facts. I should have known something was wrong, he said. When Vance asked those questions about you, I told myself it was routine. Emma looked at him. People tell themselves that, she said. It's a very functional thing to believe. It let me participate in something I shouldn't have participated in, he said. Yes, Emma said. But you didn't make the call to Vance, and you can tell Park what you know when she contacts you. She paused. That's what's actually in front of you right now. Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Not with the managing quality of before, not with the liability awareness that had framed every interaction they'd had in 5 years, with something more direct, more human. I've been reviewing your documentation from the Hayes admission, he said. The complete chart. Your observational notes. A pause. You saw a hip fracture in a dog at 2 a.m. from the way he walked across a floor. Emma said nothing. That's a specific kind of skill, Okafor said, not nursing school skill. I had a previous specialty, Emma said, before nursing. Military veterinary, he said. Not a guess? He'd clearly done some reading. Government Veterinary Services contract, she corrected. Army Reserve Commission before that. And you left, he said, because of Meridian. Because of what happened when I tried to report Meridian, she said. He absorbed this. Then quietly, with the specific weight of a man saying something he should have said significantly earlier and is aware of that. You should have been listened to 4 years ago. Emma held his gaze. Yes, she said. I should have. The statement sat between them without apology added to it because she wasn't going to offer the apology and he wasn't asking for one. And the moment had a clarity to it that felt strangely more honest than any of the managed administrative exchanges they'd had across 5 years. Your position here, Okafor said. Your scope. I'd like to talk about that when things have settled. Okay, Emma said. He nodded. Left. Emma turned back to her patient list. At 5:30 p.m., her personal phone vibrated with a text from a number she didn't have saved but recognized as Reyes's secondary cell. Kellner cut a deal. He's giving us everyone above him. Emma read it twice, then, above him? Reyes. Senior oversight, congressional staffer, one sitting senator's aide who managed the committee that funded the contracting framework for 6 years. It goes up. Emma put the phone in her pocket. She stood at the nursing station for a moment with the ordinary noise of the hospital around her. Monitors, voices, the particular ambient sound of a building full of people doing the difficult and necessary work of keeping each other alive. And she thought about a 43-page report that had been moved into a restricted archive by a man who is now in federal custody in Arlington, Virginia, on a cold October day, finally, unable to make anything else disappear. She picked up her next chart. She went back to work. The weeks that followed did not feel like victory. That was the first thing Emma noticed. that the closing of something large and long-running did not produce the sensation that people seemed to expect it would. Colleagues who heard pieces of the story through the hospital's efficient informal network looked at her with a quality of expectation, as if she should be visibly different, as if the resolution of something that had taken 4 years and cost her a career in 2 states of distance should register on her face as relief or triumph, or at minimum some readable form of release. She felt tired. Specifically, thoroughly tired. The way you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that putting it down doesn't immediately feel like lightness. It just feels like the absence of weight, which is its own kind of strange. She worked her shifts, she documented carefully. She ate lunch in the break room instead of the stairwell, which was a change she made without deciding to make it, noticing only afterward that she'd started doing it sometime in the second week of November, when the cold had settled into Aspen Valley for real, and the mountain views from the hospital windows went white above 8,000 feet and stayed there. The legal proceedings moved at the pace legal proceedings always moved, which is to say, slowly, with a thoroughness that Emma had learned to appreciate rather than resent. Park called twice in the first month with updates that were precise and stripped of drama. Kellner had provided a full cooperation statement, the congressional aide had been indicted, Meridian's parent company had filed for dissolution, the mandatory reevaluation framework for military working dogs was being drafted by a joint DoD and independent veterinary board panel. Arriaga's name was on the panel. 3 of the other names Emma had given Park were on it too. Vance and Fitch had both entered guilty pleas. The man whose voice Emma had heard on Reyes's phone, she learned his name eventually, a private security contractor named Gerard Solis, who had been Kellner's operational fixer for 6 years, had been extradited from Nevada and was awaiting trial. Donna Marsh had resigned from Silver Ridge Medical Center in the 3rd week of October, before the federal process formally required anything of her. She had contacted a lawyer, made a proactive statement to Park's office, and cooperated fully with the subsequent investigation into which staff contacts she'd reported and when. Emma heard from Navarro that Donna had moved to be closer to her daughter, the daughter whose university acceptance had been the lever, the daughter who had gotten in on her own merits, and would never know what her mother had done in a sideways attempt to protect something that didn't need protecting. Emma thought about Donna occasionally, not with anger exactly, with something more complicated, the specific discomfort of understanding someone's choices well enough to see how they happened without being able to entirely excuse them. That discomfort didn't resolve. She stopped trying to make it resolve. Ghost surgery happened on a Thursday in the 3rd week of November. Emma wasn't there for it. She was working a shift, and the surgery was in Denver, and there was nothing she could have contributed to a veterinary surgical suite except being present, which wasn't a good enough reason to drive 4 hours round trip on a shift day. She knew this. She worked her shift. Lucas texted at 2:40 p.m. He's out. Went well. Arriaga's specialist says the joint damage was significant, but the repair looks solid. Emma replied, how long for recovery? 6 to 8 weeks restricted movement, then graduated rehab. She put her phone away and went back to her patients. At 6 p.m. at shift change, Lucas texted again. He's awake. Recognized my voice immediately. Tried to stand up. Had to physically stop him. Emma read that twice. Something in her chest did a thing she didn't have clean language for. Not sentiment exactly, more like the specific recognition of a fact that matters. A dog who has been managed pain for a year, waking up from surgery, trying to stand, the particular stubbornness of an animal that doesn't know how to stay down. She thought, of course he did. She typed, tell him to rest. Lucas, I'll pass that along. He'll ignore it. Emma, I know, but Reyes came back to Aspen Valley in December. Not officially. The case had moved past the phase where field visits were necessary, and Reyes's broken ribs had healed to the point where she was back at full operational capacity, which meant she was busy with the 17 other things that had accumulated during her recovery. She came because she wanted to, which she stated without preamble when she appeared at the nursing station on a Tuesday afternoon in her civilian jacket, with a coffee from the place down the road, and the look of someone who has made a deliberate choice to be somewhere rather than ending up there by accident. I have a few hours, Reyes said. I thought I'd come in person. They sat in the consultation room, their room now, in the shorthand of repeated use, and Reyes laid out the final shape of the case the way she laid out everything, direct, sequenced, without unnecessary softening. Kellner had received a 12-year sentence, reduced from a potential 18 in exchange for the cooperation agreement that had brought down the congressional aid and 2 additional DoD officials whose names had been in the before version documents. The senator's aide had taken a deal for 7 years. Meridian's CEO had fought his charges through 2 months of procedural delays before his attorneys had apparently done the math and advised him that the evidence was too complete, and he had pleaded guilty to federal fraud and conspiracy charges that carried a mandatory minimum of 8 years. Vance and Fitch were each looking at 4 to 6 years, depending on final sentencing. And the animals, Emma said. Reevaluation program is operational, Reyes said. 47 dogs identified in the first assessment wave as having undiagnosed injuries. 11 of those with injuries significant enough to require immediate veterinary intervention. She paused. 3 who probably won't fully recover from what went untreated. The damage was too established. Emma absorbed this without expression, which was the only way she could absorb it. The specific arithmetic of what 4 years of delay costs when the people paying the cost are animals with no mechanism for complaint. The 11 who needed immediate intervention, she said. All receiving it, Reyes said, through the independent panel, Arriaga's team. Emma nodded. Carter. Reyes set her coffee down. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer, but less procedural. Your original report. The 43 pages. It's been formally entered into the case record, which means it exists in a federal archive that nobody can move or restrict. She paused. The OIG has acknowledged formally that the report was improperly transferred out of their standard review index by Kellner within 48 hours of its original submission. That acknowledgement is also on record. Emma was quiet for a moment. What does that mean practically? It means the record shows that you were right, that you were ignored deliberately, and that the person who ignored you did so to protect a fraud operation. Reyes looked at her evenly. It's not an apology from the institution. Institutions don't do that, but it's documentation, permanent documentation that says what happened. Emma thought about the man behind the desk, about the smooth authority of his voice telling her that her concerns were noted, about the specific loneliness of walking out of a government building with 43 pages of careful work and understanding in the elevator on the way down that the work was going to disappear. It's enough, she said. And it was. Not because documentation erased anything, but because the truth being on record meant it couldn't be moved again. It was somewhere now. It was findable. Reyes picked her coffee back up. What are you going to do, she said, with all of this, going forward? Emma considered the question. Okafor wants to discuss my scope, she said, expanding it. There are apparently several military veteran patients in the area whose animals went through DoD contractor evaluations in the last 6 years. He wants someone who understands that intersection of human and animal care. And I said I'd think about it. Emma paused. I've also been in contact with the independent panel. They're looking for people to develop evaluation protocols for the reassessment wave. People who know what accurate military working dog assessment looks like. She stopped. It's not a full-time position, but it's work I know how to do. Reyes looked at her for a moment. You've been doing 2 jobs in your head this whole time, she said. The nursing and the other thing. The other thing is what I was trained for, Emma said. The nursing is what I chose when the other thing stopped being possible. A pause. It turns out they're not incompatible. No, Reyes said. I can see that. They sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of people who have been through something difficult together and don't need to narrate the fact of it. Olson's concussion, Emma said. Is he actually okay? He's fine. He's annoying everyone at the office again, which is how we know he's recovered. A pause. He said to tell you that if you ever want a job change, DCIS is always looking for people who can find a hip fracture in a dog at 2 in the morning. Tell him I appreciate that, Emma said. And no. Reyes almost smiled. It made it this time. No, she agreed. Lucas brought Ghost in on a Friday afternoon in late January. Not for any medical reason. Ghost's recovery was progressing. The Denver specialist was satisfied. The graduated rehab was going according to the timeline Arriaga had projected. Lucas brought him in because Ghost had, apparently, made it clear that this was something he wanted to do. In the specific way that dogs make things clear when they've decided. a direction of attention, a posture of intention, and the particular patience of an animal that will wait as long as necessary for the human to stop overthinking it. He's been looking at the door of the truck every morning for 2 weeks, Lucas said, standing at the nursing station in his jacket with Ghost on a lead beside him. The direction of the truck when I park it facing town is toward this building. Emma looked at Ghost. Ghost looked at her. He was different. Not dramatically. He was still the same animal, the same worn-in presence, the same careful economy of movement that had always characterized him. But the specific compensation pattern was gone. The weight distribution was even. The hip extension when he turned was full and unguarded. He moved like a dog who was not managing anything, and the difference between that and what Emma had observed on the first night was the difference between a person walking in shoes that almost fit and someone finally walking in their own. "He looks good," Emma said. "Better than good," Lucas said. "Arriaga says the joint mobility is at about 80% of where it should be for his age and profile. She thinks with another month of rehab it'll be close to 90. That's a strong outcome for the extent of the original damage." "Yeah." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Carter, he knows the truck faces this building. He doesn't know what the building is. He knows something about this direction." Emma came around the nursing station. She crouched in front of Ghost, which put her at his eye level, something she'd done in the first days from professional habit, and now did because it was simply how she talked to him. He looked at her with the complete focused attention that had always been his register with her, the quality that was neither performance nor demand, just presence. She put her hand on the side of his face, carefully, the way you handle something that has been through a lot and doesn't need to be handled roughly to prove it can take it. He leaned into it, the full weight of his head, the same way he had on the first night when he'd pressed himself against her leg in a room full of frightened people. "Good boy," she said. She didn't say it with the theatrical warmth people use on animals to perform their own affection. She said it the way she said the things she meant, quiet, direct, entirely real. Ghost made a sound low in his chest. Not a whine, not quite a sigh. Something that had no clean English translation but meant, approximately, yes, finally, exactly this. Emma stood up. Lucas was watching her with the expression she'd seen on his face before, the recalibrating quality, the updating of a map. "You know," he said, "I spent 11 months thinking he was just getting old, that the way he moved was just time passing." "People do that," Emma said. "It's easier. It's not an excuse." "I didn't say it was." She looked at him. "You noticed enough to bring him into a hospital at 2 in the morning. That's not nothing." "I brought him in because my arm was half off," Lucas said. "He brought himself in." "He did," Emma said. "And then he chose who to go to." She paused. "You could have taken the documents back when I asked for them. You gave them to me." Lucas absorbed this. "You knew what you were looking at." "I knew what I was looking at 4 years before I looked at his file," Emma said. "But 4 years ago I didn't have him." She glanced at Ghost. "Evidence is only as useful as the moment that makes it usable." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" he said. "For you." She told him about the panel work, about Okafor's offer, about Reyes's visit and the formal record entry and the 43 pages that were now in a federal archive that nobody could restrict. He listened without interrupting, which she'd learned was his natural mode. He was a precise listener, the kind of person who absorbed before responding rather than building his response during your sentences. "You're staying," he said, "in Aspen Valley." "I live here," she said. "I work here. There's no reason to go anywhere." 4 years ago, you came here to be 3 states away from everything." "I know," she said. "Now I'm here because I'm here." A pause. "That's different." He nodded, seemed to understand the distinction without requiring it to be elaborated. Ghost, beside him, had turned his attention to the corridor, not anxiously, just observing, the way he always observed environments he was interested in. The ER was mid-afternoon busy. The particular ambient energy of the department moved around him like water around something solid and unhurried. "He's not afraid of this place," Lucas said. "He was the first night, not of people, of the environment, the noise, the light. He's not anymore." "No," Emma said. "He isn't." "Because he decided it was safe." Lucas looked at Ghost, and then at Emma with the directness of a man who's saying the thing he came to say. That's what he was doing, coming in here. He needed someone to see that he wasn't okay, and he picked the one person he'd decided would actually look. Emma didn't answer immediately. You saved his life, Lucas said. Not dramatically, not with anything visible. You just looked at him and wrote down what you saw and didn't stop when people told you it didn't matter. That's the job, Emma said. Not everybody does the job like that. No, she said. They don't. They stood in the corridor for a moment, the three of them, the nurse and the former ranger and the 9-year-old Malinois, who had walked into an emergency room in the middle of the night and changed the direction of everything, while the hospital moved around them in its ordinary, extraordinary way. Then Lucas said, I'll let you get back to it. Thank you for bringing him, she said. He brought himself, Lucas said. I just drove. He and Ghost walked toward the exit. At the automatic doors, Ghost turned once and looked back at Emma with those calm, serious eyes. Not longing, not sadness, just the acknowledgement of a being who knows where it stands with the world, and is, for the first time in a long time, okay with the standing. Then the doors opened, and they were gone. Emma stood in the corridor. Around her, the ER continued its work. The monitors, the voices, the quiet, controlled urgency of people managing the distance between damage and repair. She had been standing in rooms like this for 5 years. She had been overlooked in rooms like this for 5 years. She had documented and been dismissed and redirected and managed and warned off, and none of it had changed what she saw when she looked at something that needed to be seen. She was still here. She went back to work. She did not feel like a hero. She felt like a person who had done her job on a night when her job happened to matter more than usual, and then had continued doing it when the people with authority over her would have preferred she stop. She felt like someone who was tired and had things left to do and was going to do them. That was enough. It had always been enough. It just took time for the room to catch up to that fact. The ones who see clearly are rarely the loudest people in the room. They are the ones still working when everyone else has looked away, writing down what is true, for as long as it takes, until the truth finally becomes too documented to ignore. You don't have to be powerful to matter. You just have to refuse to stop